Hi and welcome back to another episode of the Iceberg Mountain. Today we're building off our previous episode about professional development and talking about someone that we met there and the impact that it's kind of had on our practice and what we think it could mean for your practice as well. While we were at the Future of Learning conference at the International School of Kuala Lumpur, both David and I had the opportunity to meet Steve Jackman, and he's a really inspiring music educator. And actually, David had the opportunity to speak to him a little bit more recently on a Zoom call, and that's the basis of what we're going to talk to you about today.
Throughout this episode, I will be embedding some of the conversations we had. He shared with me something called the Informal Learning Principles. These principles are actually from a book that Lucy Green wrote. It's called How Popular Musicians Learn, A Way Ahead for Music Education. And basically what she was trying to do was, she was curious to see why popular musicians who didn't have the traditional music background were so successful in making music.
As Lucy Green went through the process of researching this and looked at these different musicians from different backgrounds, but all musicians who haven't necessarily gone through a formal musical training, what she found were that there are 5 principles that kind of were common to each of these people. So the first principle is about student agency. It's where students choose the type of music they want to learn and what they identify with, and then they get involved with that and examine that style of music to get them, to pull them in and engage them. Principle 2 is about students learning by listening and copying recordings, and that's what she found with these musicians, is that more often than not, when they started learning music or they started their musical career as a band, they literally were copying music from other people. They were kind of like cover bands, and that's how they generally learnt music. So that's what she asked students to do as well, is listening to music and seeing if they can recreate it. Principle 3 is about learning alongside your friends. And so this is, I guess, again, the idea of a band, and that's friendship and kinship and building out from that. Principle 4 is called holistic learning, and the idea of that is really about getting the kids to just jump in, to start creating things. So, for instance, getting the kids to try and create a song, and in so doing, they find out what skills they need to learn.
Which is the opposite of traditional. Traditional, you kind of start with a simple skill and you gradually grow in complexity.
So the concept of, this principle 4, holistic learning, for example, that concept of learning through failure or discovery learning, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
So this principle 4, one of the ways that you can introduce this to students is basically giving the students an audio file. Mm-hmm. Or saying to kids, choose a song, go away and learn it.
Wow, that is so cool.
And you don't give them any other information. But through that process, they then realize what they need to learn. Mm-hmm. And then you start at the beginning of the cycle and be like, right, now we're going to learn some skills. Based on what we've learned that we need to go away and learn, how are we gonna learn it? Mm-hmm. And then you start to build up that process.
And then the last part, principle 5, is the integration of performing, composing, and creating. And so that's a little bit different to normal, where normally you would have this practice time and then you would perform at the end. You're composing at one stage, doing improvisation at a different stage. This is really about looking at this in a more integrated way, where all of these components come together in order to give the students opportunities to develop skills and improve. So one of the reasons why we decided to talk about this today is that David and I have different musical experiences from our childhood in school, but both of them resonate really strongly. So I'll start with mine and give my example. When I was in 8th grade, I started playing the saxophone. My other friends were in our concert band at school and I wanted to participate. So I learned saxophone from year 8 until year 12. I completed different exams. I still have my saxophone, it's at my mum's house, but I don't play it anymore. I would say since I left high school in year 12, I've probably played my saxophone 8 times maybe. And I think it's really sad because the saxophone's a beautiful instrument and something that's really fun to play. That being said, when I was about 24 or 25, I learned to play guitar with a friend that I used to go and have dinner with every Wednesday, and I still play the guitar. And it's something that I find funny because there was no formal tuition involved and there was no lessons or anything. It just was literally going to my friend's house and we played together. When we talked about this framework and how this is about utilizing those informal teaching techniques that people have used over time, this really resonated with me because I feel sometimes so bad about the fact that I don't play the saxophone even though I had 4 years of very structured practice.
Right.
And then with the guitar, I still play it, not particularly well, but I love to play it because it's something that's based around friendship and community.
For me, I played the violin when I was in elementary, I think, for like 2 years. And I really disliked it because music that I wasn't really even into. Also, my experiences in music class, I didn't get to choose the music. The music that I enjoyed was more what was happening like with hip hop and etc. And I was hoping that music class would be more like that. And so I think that's why I was blown away by this approach is you give students who are really into music, which is almost everybody, and you give them the opportunity to choose their music, really dissect the process of making music. Yeah, more of that inquiry-based approach. And I think I shared in the last episode, I've been really into music. I recently listened to Tyler, the Creator's new album, and I'm just blown away about his artistry. I watched a documentary about him. He discussed how he was not happy with what he produced with his 3 albums at that time. He identified that he felt like he only had 3 great songs that were written. So he decided to just bunker down and really try to work on his craft.
I have 3 good written songs from my first 3 albums only. I said, okay, let's change this. I'm going to learn how to write songs. I'm going to teach myself how to write songs again and really understand it. So then I said, well, to do that, what are good written songs? What do the people think of written songs? What is pop music? What is that derivative of? Oh, that's a hook. Oh, that's structure. No, this beat has melody. How did I not notice it? Oh, it's urgent. So that changed the energy, reading books, studying songs, not getting in the car and listening to the songs I naturally want to hear, listening to some random shit. Just, what did they do?
So as you can see, like he had this mission, this goal, and then he started asking himself these questions, really investigate and learn how to answer these questions. And from then on, he produced amazing albums that are Grammy Award winning now. And so I think what Tyler was talking about, his process, that is very close to what Lucy Green is trying to do within music education in schools. During a meeting, I shared this idea of what if Tyler, the Creator, was the person who designed the learning experiences for our students? What would that look like? How drastically different would it be to what's happening with traditional music education?
So thinking about musicians that we enjoy, last year I went through this phase of being really into Connor Price. And Connor Price is somebody who became famous really through Instagram and TikTok. And he was an actor when he was younger, and then he was always into hip hop. But what I love about Connor Price is that he has no label, like he's not assigned to Sony or anyone else. He has no particular management. He just does everything himself. And this concept that we wanted to talk about is the idea that along with the development of certain technologies, you get a democratization of practice. In this regard, what Connor Price is doing is he is using software on his computer to be able to bypass all of these large labels, recording studios, all these things. He just does things in his home, and then he publishes through social media and then on through Spotify, and is able to control his music and his business by himself. When David talked to Steve Jackman, he introduced us to another educator called James Humberstone, who talks about this idea that basically with the development of technology, we have the opportunity in schools to open up doors for students to do things that are impactful in our society on a larger level than what would have been possible in the past.
2/3 of kids in the UK at least are making music of their own volition, often at home and completely self-taught. Now if you think about it, 13 years, what's happened? Well, we got YouTube in 2005, we got Facebook that year as well. Give them a bit of time to take grip, and it's amazing the way they've dovetailed. And that's really the same time that Lucy Green was writing her formative books on informal learning. So we can see here that this stuff is self-propelling, whether or not we're taking part in it or not. I guess another really important part of that is that technology has democratized music making. And again, I'm not talking about listening to music on Spotify or whatever. I'm talking about the fact that this little baby that we keep in our pockets has got enough power in it for us to actually sequence a whole song, actually create a whole piece of music. The kind of things that just 20 years ago when I was, well, not a teenager, in my early 20s, and making an album would have cost like $100,000 to put in a studio. And at this time, while we're being marginalized in the curriculum all over the world, schools are looking for ways to engage kids, to build creativity, to do things like project-based learning. And that's completely natural to everything that we do. We quite often call our projects things like a concert or making an album or releasing a track.
So one of the things that James talks about in here is this idea that for about 95% of the people, our traditional style of music education doesn't really work necessarily in order to get people to do it in the longer term. For 5% of the people, it works very well, and they are very structured. They have like this kind of classical background. They can read sheet music and those sort of things. And so this development of this structure in particular by Lucy Green is giving us the opportunity to stop and reflect on which of our practices in education, and not just in music, but across the board, which of our practices work for 5% of our population but don't work for 95%.
So I guess that's our problem. We have a worldview. We all had a music education that was wonderful for us. That's how we've ended up where we are, right? But it's really hard for us to imagine that actually maybe that's not the best music education. And we just have to look at the raw facts. We have to look at the extremely small numbers of kids who are staying in our music programs through to the end of school, and the number of kids who just love music, which is all of them, and want to be doing music, which is 2/3 of them, according to that survey.
And James also talks about digital devices, how that has democratized music. And it kind of connects to the idea of the AI team that Dr. Saba was talking about in the last episode. Now you have an AI team, you have ChatGPT and other tools. You can create this team to help you create the content or the solutions that you are trying to do. And I think that relates with music as well. Now you have students who have all these AI tools or digital devices. The first person that I thought of thinking about this idea was Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin is famous for working with the Beastie Boys, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, even Lady Gaga. He helped produce a lot of these famous songs.
Do you play instruments?
Barely.
Do you know how to work a soundboard?
No. I have no technical ability, and I know nothing about music.
You must know something.
Well, I know what I like and what I don't like, and I'm decisive about what I like and what I don't like.
So what are you being paid for?
The confidence that I have in my taste and my ability to express what I feel has proven helpful for artists.
He's just telling everyone, all the engineers, like, oh, this is the sound I want. And now I feel like kids have that as well. Like the kids can tell AI that they want this specific sound without having to know all the skills and without having to have a lot of resources or the people around you. And that's kind of exciting for music.
So one of the things that was really interesting with Steve Jackman is he created a course as part of a master's activity or an assignment. And it's a Canva course, and it's all about implementing this process as a music teacher. And it's phenomenal. It's very well structured. It's highly resourced. One of the key aspects he has in there is incorporating advice and tutorials from people who are practicing artists in order to give students a grounding or more information about different styles of music to make sure that they can actually create things for themselves as well.
Developing a course on songwriting, wouldn't it be cool if you could have 3 different pathways for following a songwriting approach, an authentic approach, and a bit like choose your own adventure? So you'd click on the avatar of a character who's like a hip hop artist, and then you'd follow their composition process to get a feel for what. In an ideal world, you'd get a hip hop artist to come in and model how it's done, because my white English classical background is not going to allow me to teach hip hop authentically. YouTube tutorials are a really valid process of of learning how to produce electronic music, because that's how electronic musicians learn.
Yeah.
So it's about finding so I think it can transfer into any area.
And one thing that I loved about that is, in researching for this episode, I was watching a lot of interviews with Tim Minchin. Tim Minchin authored and wrote the score for Matilda, and he's a really famous musician. He was originally a comedian. He's a very talented pianist. He is an interesting case of this particular example where he had music lessons, and in particular piano lessons, but then he quit.
Before that, when you were in school, in WA, were you in school bands? Did you do music?
I am a result of a failed. I got kicked out of the school choir. I quit piano at sort of 14 because I wasn't practicing.
The last lesson before he quit, or when he told his teacher he was going to quit, she said, "Let me just show you how chords work." And she showed him this progression in C major, and he said that basically kind of gave him a grounding for understanding that music is all about patterns. And from there, he basically didn't have any lessons after that, but he became like an exceptional pianist and someone who can create music. Another thing that he talked about, which I think kind of ties into Steve's course, is the idea. He basically says that children react far better to positive modeling than they do to dictatorial kind of listening. And he's talking about with parents and like forcing kids to go to lessons.
You can model for them, and it's much more effective. So I just play and help them out. They don't like being taught by me. It's like at all. So I'm like, you could just play a triad. Okay, I'm going. Take them to the theatre, take them to gigs, have music in your house, have instruments lying around, let them know that it's valid. It's as important. I say to my kids all the time, I just don't think science class is more important than drama. They're both important. They're both subjects you can explore, and let's have a chat about it.
He said when children are modelled to and they have musical instruments in the room, and that there's music being played in the house and those sort of things, that's how students get involved in music. And once again, just to be clear, this is not an episode about like why musical teaching doesn't work. I think what we can take away from this is like, this is the same in any subject, like making sure there are books around that kids can get involved in, or science experiments, and giving them opportunities to be involved and hands-on and see people working in these fields and what they do and why it's important that they do it. So that idea of modelling, I think, is something, again, I'm going to really think about the next couple of weeks of how can I model to students the characteristics and skills that I want them to develop maybe independently.
There's a really cool documentary I watched that kind of showcases how teachers initially who wanted to try this approach were a bit hesitant and nervous about the outcome.
Goodness, how is this going to work? How is this going to work with year nines and, keeping them all on task? And I actually was quite sort of sceptical really about how it could work.
I was also concerned about the very nature of informal learning, and that the freedom that he gave the pupils, which they wouldn't otherwise normally receive in a traditional music curriculum, they would take advantage of it, and it would create chaos and ill discipline and misbehaviour. And I was very wrong. By the first lesson, it was quite clear that pupils were extremely excited about the work, very highly motivated.
I like this way of learning much better because it's more independent, and for people who know a bit more about music and like it more, it's much more fun for them.
In my conversation with Steve, he talked about the purpose of music.
I started off by showing you this guy Ethan Hines. So he works in New York, and he says, it all comes back to what the purpose of music education is. And if your students don't have the opportunity to play in orchestras and bands and choirs outside of school, what's the point? Whereas they are going to have the opportunity to produce music outside of school, or even like doing ukulele, they've got more chance of joining a ukulele group outside of school than they are like an orchestra.
Absolutely.
So he talks a lot about he talks about really like back to what the purposes of music are.
I mean, for me personally, I think the purpose of music is an outlet for people to create something to express themselves emotionally, to express their ideas that they have, the things that they're going through. It's a form of expression my question would be, is traditional music education, are we equipping students to do that?
For me, music is really about connecting with other people a lot. And one of the things that I wish I'd had the opportunity to do that I feel like Steve Jackman students get the opportunity to do is to create my own music. And I think that's something that I don't begrudge anyone for the fact I didn't learn how to do that necessarily. But I feel like it's so exciting for the kids that work with him in particular, that they have this opportunity to create and to express themselves in a completely different way that I just don't personally have access to at this point in time. So that idea of like, what is music for and why do we have music education, that comes into a larger context too of like, why do we have schools? Why are we learning? Why are we teaching students? And when I think about that, it really is about giving students the skills and aptitudes that they need to be successful in society and to participate. And hopefully, what I'm hoping I'm going to change in my practice is making sure that I provide opportunities for students to either see people who are doing these things and have a model that they can work towards, or indeed give them opportunities where they can use the skills they have already to participate in some way and become active members of our community.
Yeah, so whatever you teach, whatever subject you focus on, think about what is the purpose and how can we make sure that that purpose is connected to the actual instruction and the learning experiences that the students get.
So remember, be the iceberg
and climb your mountain.